Welcome to a moment of meditation. I am Patricia Lee, the Assistant Chaplain here at the Village. We are continuing in a series called Knowing God from the Parables of Jesus. So far we have meditated on 16 parables, roughly following the chronological order as they appear in the Gospels. The parable for today is found in Matthew chapter 25, following the one we meditated on last time. That is the parable of the 10 virgins found in the beginning of the chapter. Once again, we want to set the stage to better understand the purpose of the parable. I will read for you several verses from the previous chapter, Matthew 24. In verse 3 we read, "As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, 'Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the close of the age?'" So we learned that Jesus was now addressing his disciples. The topic at hand was what to expect at the close of the age, the end time, when Jesus will return. That would be the theme of Matthew chapter 24 and 25. The three parables he told in chapter 25 were all to illustrate the point in the last verse of Matthew chapter 24, verse 44, and that is, "Therefore you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect." In the first parable, the 5 virgins who were wise were ready with oil in their lamps, prepared even for the delay of the bridegroom in arriving. But the 5 foolish virgins ran out of oil, so that when the bridegroom arrived, they needed to get more oil and could not be back in time to join the wedding feast. Today we are going to study the second parable in Matthew chapter 25, commonly called the parables of the talents. In verse 13 we read, "Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour." Now that would be the conclusion of the last parable and the introduction to this one. Jesus said, starting from verse 14, "For it will be like a man going on a journey who calls his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away." Here you see the property the master entrusted to his servants is called talents. What are talents? Talents are unit of measurement of the weight of precious metals. So a talent of gold would be more valuable than a unit of silver. Even a talent of silver would be equivalent to 2 years of wages, a large sum of money. Now, because the pronunciation is close to the English word talent, meaning natural ability, we tend to think Jesus was talking about endowment of special ability. Or was he talking about money management? We will try to understand the meanings after we get the whole story. For now, this is what we know. Servants or slaves in those days did not own property. But we see here that the master is entrusting his servants with his property. And Jesus specified that the master gave the servants different amounts to each according to his ability. So the one with the greater ability received a bigger sum. Then the master left to go on his journey. Notice notice the master did not tell his servants when he would return. Now let's read on from verse 16. "He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money." So we see 2 of the 3 servants traded their money and yielded a return of 100%, doubling the asset. Notice the phrase "went at once." They did not tarry, but began the task right away. We catch a sense of urgency, even excitement. Now with trading or investing, there are always risks, but these two were full of confidence. They watched the market and seized the opportunity without delay. But the one who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Why? Jesus didn't say here, but we know that instead of taking the risk to trade and invest, he didn't do anything to let the money grow, but hid it in the hole in the ground he dug. Continuing from verse 19. Now after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. You could imagine the smile on his face and the excitement in his voice. He was happy to see the master had returned and proud to present what he had accomplished. Everything still belonged to the master, but you can sense his joy. How did his master respond? He praised the servant, saying, Well done, and he called him good and faithful. Now he didn't give the servant a portion of his property. Rather, he said, I will set you over much. He would entrust he would entrust the servant with greater responsibilities, perhaps managing a greater portion of his property. And then the master said, Enter into the joy of your master. Now what was the joy of the master? The obvious reason would be the doubling of his asset, but I'm sure that's not all. Let's suppose you have started a family business and you have been training and grooming your children to manage and develop the business. Eventually, you pass the helm to them. When the business blossoms, are you most happy only because the family asset has increased many folds? If that's my children managing my family business, I know my joy would come from witnessing their growth in confidence and ability. They're maturing into competent leaders and managers. Their pride and joy in their accomplishment, and above all, their love and faithfulness to the family. At this point, I can't help but think about the family in an earlier parable, about the father with a prodigal young son and the resentful elder son. What a pity that the elder son, while being far more privileged than the servants, was not only blind to his privileges as a son, but even refused to enter into his father's joy. What a great loss. Now getting back to the story, we see a similar scenario with the servant who got the 2 talents. From verse 22 we read, And he also, who had the 2 talents, came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. Now what about the 3rd servant? From verse 24 to 28 we read, He also who had received the 1 talent came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant! You knew that I reap where I have not sowed and gather where I scattered no seed? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. What was the excuse or explanation of this servant about his inaction? He said he was afraid. Afraid of what? In his view, the master was harsh and unreasonable. But the servant was condemned by his own words, as the master said, "Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest." But taking no action and avoiding all the risk, he let the opportunity slip by so that the 1 talent yielded no interest. For that he was called a wicked and slothful servant. What became of him? We will read to the end of the chapter. The master commanded the other servants, "So take the talents from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For everyone who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Jesus made it clear that this servant was not condemned because he only had 1 talent, but because he was wicked and slothful in not being faithful in fulfilling his assignment, which was to manage the portion of the master's property entrusted to him. While the other 2 servants were working diligently with enthusiasm, he missed out on the joy of exercising his ability to serve his master and eventually being cast into the outer darkness with weeping and gnashing of teeth. Let's see what lessons we can take away from this parable. First, it doesn't matter how much we are entrusted with. What matters is we take the opportunity to make the best of the talents. So what does talent symbolize? It's not about money management, but it could involve money as a part of what God has entrusted us with. It is not limited to our natural ability or giftedness, as the English word talent mean. But we should definitely make the best use of the talent God has endowed us. Talent here symbolizes anything and everything, including our life experience, our physical ability, our interests and hobbies, our intellect, our passions, etc., etc. Even adverse circumstances can be an asset that can yield tremendous return. For example, only in the last century was polygamy prohibited in China. I have friends who grew up in such complicated family dynamics. One of my dearest friends was a product of an affair. Because of her existence, her mother was received into the family as a concubine. My friend had 2 mothers, several half-siblings, and later a younger brother, and they all lived together with the father under 1 roof. From birth, she experienced the resentment and animosity from her older half-siblings. The abuse she had endured was not something I could understand nor share. But from a very young age, she had learned not to place her trust in people because she found no safety from the ones who should have protected her. Yet ever since she heard the gospel and acknowledged God is the almighty and sovereign creator, she would take all her needs, all her grievances, all her questions to the Lord. Her spiritual maturity and her faith were far surpassing her peers, and I have been blessed by her friendship and her godly wisdom. Looking back, I see that even her messy family background was a talent entrusted to her, among with her receptive spirit and the opportunity she seized to study in seminary. Her fruitful life is a testimony to God's faithfulness and pleasure in her. That is the first point, making the most of the talent God has entrusted us. Second, we have no idea when the Master will return. The time for us to serve him faithfully is now, before he comes back. It is unacceptable to bury our talents and live fearfully and slothfully. There is joy in serving faithfully, and especially in bringing joy to the Master and entering into his joy. And last but not least, like the other parables about the kingdom of heaven, Jesus is drilling into us that when he returns, There will be a separation of the wicked and slothful from the good and faithful, and the foolish ones who are unprepared for the wise, from the wise ones who make it their priority to equip themselves with oil in the lamps, which means being filled with the Holy Spirit so they can be a bright light. The hymn for today is Come All Christians, Be Committed. Can be found in number 455 from our hymnal. It sums up the lessons in the parable of the talents. Dan Stokes will now lead us. Now receive the benediction from Romans chapter 12. For as in one body we have many members, and the members do not all have the same function. So we, though many, are one body in Christ, and individually members one of another. Having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, let us use them. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Praise be to God.